And it's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I am your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon, joining you from my home in Fort Wright, Kentucky. Also joining me by the powers of Zoom is my assistant for this evening, BCM Service Associate Heather Cook, and our lovely presenters for this evening, Jeannine and Doug VonStrohe. So thank you guys for being here. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's history museum, that would not be possible without support. Thank you to all of our sponsors, including the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. So let's learn more about tonight's presenters. Jeannine Kreinbrink is the president and senior partner at KMV Cultural Resources Management, LLC, which she co-founded in 2011 with Doug VonStrohe. She has combined a career in cultural resource management with conducting educational and public programs in archaeology, preservation, and history. Her career in archaeology began at NKU, volunteering at BCM, where she has been an associate archaeologist since 1981. She started a full-time career as an archaeologist in 1986, working on urban archaeology in Covington. Jeannine obtained her master's in 1992 from the University of Cincinnati and has worked as a professional archaeologist ever since. She serves on the board of directors for the Friends of Big Bone. She helped found and served on the board of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum, and also taught as an adjunct professor for the Anthropology and History Departments at NKU from 1997 to 2014. So thank you, Jeannine, for being here. Thank you, Jeannine. Our next presenter is Doug VonStrohe, who earned his BS in Anthropology from NKU in 2004 and his Master of Professional Studies from the University of Maryland in 2023. He has accumulated 20 years of field experience in cultural resources management. In 2011, he became Vice President and Staff Archaeologist at KMV Cultural Resources Management, LLC, a Northern Kentucky-based firm. He continues to work on archaeological projects with KMV throughout the Northern Kentucky Greater Cincinnati region. So thank you, Doug, for being here.
Thank you.
Now, a few reminders before we get started. We love participation from our viewers. So if you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. And now the fun part. We have a quiz question. The first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live wins a Northern Kentucky History Hour prize and, most importantly, bragging rights. So tonight's question is, which local county had the most WPA-sponsored archaeological digs in the region from the late 1930s to 1940s? So please leave those answers in the chat. And then I am going to let Heather stop sharing her screen. And I am going to attempt to share my screen for you and get our presentation pulled up for our lovely presenters. And then you guys let me know if that looks okay to you when that loads.
There we go.
And then you'll just have to give me a little, let me know when you want me to change. And Doug, I just want you to let you know that your microphone is turned off.
Yeah.
There we go. Perfect. All right. Thank you, guys. You can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here to listen to the talk. And you can go to the second slide, please. There we go. Okay. So this is actually part one of a two-part presentation. Tonight, we're going to define archaeology, some of the terms. We've talked a lot over the years about all the things we've done and different kinds of projects, but we haven't really defined some of the terms. We're going to do that first. And then we're going to go over the history of archaeology in the United States with an emphasis on the tri-state. There's a lot of good archaeology being done here in the past. And then in 2 weeks, we are going to reconvene and we'll offer a brief overview of archaeology methods. And then most importantly, we will have an extended question and answer session. What questions do you have about archaeology, about local sites? How do we know where to look, et cetera? You know, whatever questions you might have in your mind, you can put them in the chat tonight and they'll keep track of them. And if we don't have time at the end to answer a few, we'll definitely answer anything next week. And then at the end of the presentation, I have an email address that'll be on a slide if you want to email some questions. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish. And anyway, she already went over the trivia question, which is at the bottom of the slide. And I think somebody already answered it. So I'm going to turn this over to Doug, who is going to go over some definitions for you. So we'll need the next slide for Doug, and then Doug, you can go on.
All right, great, thank you. So we're talking about archaeology. So what is archaeology? Overall, archaeology is a subdiscipline of anthropology. Anthropology is the study of human beings and their ancestors through time and space, and in relation to physical character, environmental and social relations, and culture. And to break that down a little further, culture is made up of our unique non-biological characteristics such as language, religion, social structures, and material objects. Think of culture as it's a learned pattern of behaviors, beliefs, and traditions that are generally passed down from one generation to the next. So anthropology has many subgroups. In there is physical anthropology, cultural ethnography, ethnology, social anthro, and linguistics. Archaeology itself falls under the physical anthropology part. It's a look at human biological evolution, behavior, and variations among populations. So archaeologists tend to fit underneath the physical side of the anthropology. Next slide, please. So archaeology is the study of past human culture, and we study past human cultures by the material objects left behind by those people. We study the material remains to help kind of reconstruct the past lifeways, how people lived, how they interact with their environment, and how long they lived and what kind of changes they had in their society makeup. Some of our main goals doing archaeology, we try to conserve archaeological resources for the future. We study sites and culture through space and time. We reconstruct past lifeways. We try to explain why cultures change and why some remain unchanged. And then one of the big things is really understanding past lifeways and the relationship to contemporary time and societies. So a lot of that is the change in the social structures and the social behaviors through the materials that they left behind. Some of the benefits of studying archaeology, conducting archaeology, we can, with the information derived from archaeological sites, this allows us to sometimes connect people to their communities. It brings them back to their traditions and informing the community of their heritage and of their traditions and of their culture. And then, so, you know, we identify new and undocumented sites. So there's always the process of discovery too. That's always fun. And then preserving and conserving sites, archaeological sites, and the materials. And that's for future studies. Again, it's for presentations. That's what we're doing here. That's why museums exist. And then tourism and job creation are also benefits of doing archaeology. Let's see. So studying archaeology, the first thing a lot of people think of outside of the dust blowing around on a outside in the site digging holes and all that is the stuff that you find. The small stuff that we find are called artifacts. And these are anything that are made by humans that are generally portable, but they are small enough, anything that's been changed or created by a person. This can be a bottle. This could be buttons. We have a picture down in the lower right-hand corner of the screen there, that's a sample of different projectile points, spear points, made by different cultures. You know, some of those look to be maybe even 3,000 or 4,000 years old in there. And so it can be prehistory or history. Artifacts, that's generally the first thing that we're looking for. It's usually the first thing that we do find. And sometimes these artifacts are diagnostic of time periods. Certain bottles were only made at a certain time and forward. Certain points can be affiliated with certain cultures. It kind of gives us that time period. And that's what really helps kind of kickstart our study, is by really the small things. Next slide, please. So a step up from the little things that we find, the next thing that we generally find are features. And this can be stone walls. These are privies, fire pits, foundations. These are made by humans, but generally you cannot move them or excavate them without destroying them. And archaeology is basically the systematic destruction of a site. You get one shot at it, and it's because of these features. But these features can produce an immense amount of really important information on past cultures and time periods. Next slide, please. So together, all the little small things, and then the features, or even without features, we get is what we refer to as an archaeological site. An archaeological site is anywhere that people have been and left physical evidence behind. So this could be potentially where one bottle was dropped, or this could be an entire city. We usually describe sites based on their function, what was being done there, why were people gathering here, and these could be domestic areas, think households, burials, mortuary, ceremony, industrial and commercial, and then public and political spaces. Next slide, please. And here, our next step is, how do we find out how old a site is? Now think back to our artifacts and all that. Artifacts and features, that can get us so far back. A lot of times it's those features that really help us gather information, or digging in the soil around the features that gives us the information on how we can really start narrowing down a time frame. There's layers of soil that we're always really interested in. The dirt. We love looking at the soil, looking at the profiles. That's the vertical wall up and down basically in a hole. Think of your layers. Here, back in the 17th century, Nicholas Steno, he was a Danish scientist, and he was studying rocks, and he was really interested in their formation, and he developed a set of principles or laws of which formation of rocks and geological features are pretty standard here. And in the table that we have here in let's see, that's square A, this is the principle of superposition. So as the layers go down, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A is the younger rock, G is the oldest rock. In theory, a good undisturbed site that we like to get at, the new stuff's on top, the old stuff's on bottom. That's what you hope for. You don't always get it, but it's what you hope for. Square B has a big valley going through it. This is the law of lateral continuity. So those layers remain the same on both sides of that valley or that cut. And so you should be able to see the left side and the right side and be able to see the exact same layers in roughly the same position. And then the next slides, or the square C. Oh, go
back up a slide.
Come back up a slide, please.
There we go.
Yeah, so in the bottom left-hand corner, that's the position of initial horizontality. That's strata are formed. Strata is the individual layers. These layers are formed horizontally and then altered later. And so if you have a bunch of strata in there and they abruptly kick up or do something weird as opposed to going completely horizontal, something's been done, but it was after that formation of the rock. And then the law of cross-cutting is the bottom right-hand corner. Any episode that cross-cuts these formations have to be post-formation. So in these formations, if you're thinking about the way we see it is the layers of soil in the ground, if we have artifacts from certain time periods, in theory, your newer stuff should be at the top, your older stuff should be at the bottom. And if there is a disruption in there, then we use the side soils to kind of guide us to what time period we believe we're still in. And when we compare the disrupted soil versus the non-disrupted soil. And so this is just one of the very many clues that we get in trying to date our site and understand what was going on at our site and the human activity at the site. Next slide, please. Although not terribly often do we use dendrochronology, it is a tool in the toolbox. I'm sure many of you have probably heard of dendrochronology, and that's basically dating by tree ring count. There's some pretty big caveats with this one. It does work in certain places, and in some places not so much because it's very locationally specific. So you can actually have micro environments to where certain trees grow at different rates than the rest of the trees in the actual region, in the bigger environment. And so there's a lot of variability in there that you really have to be careful. The dendro scientists, they have samples, a catalog of samples that they try to compare to, that they have known dates on. This one, we've run into issues with it. We were studying a log house where we had some cuts made, and they were able to tell us how old the trees were, but they weren't able to tell us what year that tree was actually cut down. So there are quite a few caveats with this one. Next slide, please. So carbon-14 is probably one that you've heard of. So plants and anything that sequesters carbon will hold it, and it decays at a known rate. So back in the 1940s, scientists had figured out how to calculate the decay rate of carbon-14. And so the diagram that we have on the screen is a corn plant that's growing in the sun. It's retaining carbon, and then it drops its seed, or the turkey to the right is eating the corn, and it's ingesting the carbon. And so then this turkey, after it dies, that carbon-14 is starting to decay, and we know at what rate that is. And there are certain labs across the country. There are not tons of them, but there's a handful of labs across the country where you can send anything that's made of carbon to them, and they can use that to date approximately of when that turkey died. So this has been really useful for a lot of our sites, especially prehistoric sites, if we're able to gather charcoal or animal bone. There are, with carbon dating humans, there's a lot of problems with that because it's a very destructive or intrusive type of sampling. Pieces of bone do have to be essentially destroyed to get the carbon dates. So that can get tricky with humans, and there's plenty of examples of that. I think Kennewick Man was an example of it out in the Pacific Northwest. But carbon-14 dating is definitely something that we look to, especially on a prehistoric site with any kind of charcoal. All of this together, this is how we try to determine what happened at a site and what was going on at a site and how old the site might be. And that can give us bigger clues to the bigger picture of past lifeways. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Jeannine.
All right, thanks, Doug. We are going to do a quick review historically of the history of archaeology in the U.S., leaving lots out, of course. We're not going to talk about the Southwest very much. And we're going to focus in on Ohio and Kentucky for the most part. Some of it begins pretty early. So way back in the, say 1589, Jose de Acosta published a book where he discussed, among other things, the origins of Native Americans. So much debate in Europe about who were the indigenous peoples of the New World and where did they come from, for example. And so there was lots of discussion over many centuries. By late 18th century, Thomas Jefferson, who was involved with lots of things, you probably heard me talk about Big Bone Lick and how involved he was with paleontology. He was also interested in the human past, and he actually excavated a burial mound in Virginia, and it was one of the first systematic archaeological excavations in North America. And as the settlers moved west and coming out, especially through Ohio and this part of Kentucky, they began to find lots and lots of earthworks and burial mounds that they couldn't explain, and some of the native tribes even couldn't explain for a variety of reasons. And so a lot of speculation, especially into the 19th century, about who built these and, where'd they come from and what was their purpose. Anyway, I've got the Jefferson and Franklin and those guys down here at the bottom of this particular slide, because they were also thinking about extinction and how ancient things could be. Next slide. Sorry about my voice. Allergies. So in the 1830s and 1840s, there were two gentlemen, both first name Ephraim Davis and Ephraim Squire. And they went around mapping all the earthworks that they could find, all the way over to the Mississippi River, all up and down the Ohio, lots and lots of them in Ohio. And after the Smithsonian was formed in 1846, their first publication was a book called Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley by Squire and Davis. And you can find this, I believe it is online. You can find it and download it online. Amazing illustrations. These are some of their drawings up toward the top. Very interesting. I do mention the Southwest, 1848, William Emery, first description of the archaeological sites, all the pueblos and things out in the Southwest. 1856, Samuel Haven talks about what they were just beginning to call archaeology, which really is just the study of the ancient past. And he publishes his views on the origins of what he called the mound builders. And then, of course, we have origin of species. If we move a little bit further, a very important institution for us here in the tri-state was the Peabody Museum of Archaeology at Harvard. And it was founded in 1866 and then developed over the next decade or so. And so by the later 19th century, we began to see what we would recognize as archaeological excavations out here in the tri-state area. Next slide. Okay, one of the most famous ones is a site in Cincinnati over in Marymount called the Madisonville site. Dr. Charles Metz was a doctor who lived in Marymount, and he worked with Harvard and a man named Putnam, which we will come to in a minute. And he conducted excavations at multiple sites in the tri-state area. And one of the most famous is the Madisonville site. And they excavated there from 1879 till 1911. It became one of the most studied Fort Ancient period village sites in the region, and probably definitely in Ohio. Fort Ancient village sites are generally post 1000 AD. Madisonville site is highly significant, partly because it includes historical European artifacts, proving that native tribes were still living in the Cincinnati vicinity up through at least the 1500s and probably up into the 1600s. So very important site. Next slide. Dr. Charles Metz, along with Frederick Ward Putnam, excavated at the Turner Group of Earthworks from 1882 to 1891. This site is Middle Woodland Hopewell culture, say 0 to 400 AD, give or take. This is a map drawn by Putnam showing all the different earthworks. If you've ever driven out into a small community off of Route 50 called Newtown, which has Route 32 on one side of it, and that's where it was, along the Little Miami, and it has quite a variety there of earthworks you can see. Charles Whittlesey, who was the Ohio geologist, first described it in 1850, so it had been known for a long time. They gained extensive knowledge on the types of earthworks. While they weren't using refined excavation techniques, they did collect a lot of data. They actually did drawings, and it's vital because pretty much all of this site has since been destroyed by gravel pits along the Little Miami River. It was an extraordinary site. There was also another site up the Little Miami in Milford called the Milford Earthworks that they also spent some time excavating, and that one's pretty much gone as well. Next slide, please. Frederick Ward Putnam also rescued the Serpent Mound in Ohio, and if you haven't been there, you really should go visit the site. He bought it from the landowner, I guess, who had been plowing it, and he transferred the title to the Peabody Museum, who then in 1900 gave it to the Ohio Archaeological and Historical Society, which is now the Ohio History Connection up in Columbus, and they managed that site. 1879, the Smithsonian set up the Bureau of Ethnology, which was created by Congress and administered by the Smithsonian. This organization sponsored archaeology and published research every year. They published volumes every year, a lot of which included archaeology. 1906, the Antiquities Act, Congress passed the Antiquities Act. This was in response to the looting of Southwest sites and led to lobbying efforts for protection. And so several sites were set aside for protection as part of that. Today, 1/4 of all NPS properties started as national monuments under the Antiquities Act. They had a punitive provision so that people could be arrested. That was challenged in the 1970s, and a new law was passed in 1979 that strengthened those protections for just try to stop people from looting on federal sites. All right, this law also let the government set up national monuments. Next slide. All right, let's pivot to Kentucky. So in the early 20th century, there were two professors at the University of Kentucky, William Funkhauser and William Webb. They were not archaeologists per se trained. One was a zoology professor and the other one was a physics professor. But they were doing work with Willard Gilson, who was the Kentucky state geologist. Some of you, if you're familiar with Big Bone, might remember that Gilson wrote a very well done book about Big Bone Lick in the 1930s. They relied on people telling them information, but they went to every county in Kentucky, or at least contacted people in every county, and started trying to document sites that people knew about. And by 1932, which is when the book with the blue cover, that's a reprint, was published, they had documented 13 sites in Boone County. And this included Petersburg, of course, various mounds and sites at Big Bone Lick. They noted only 2 in Kenton County, but none in Campbell County in 1932. The Bent site over at 12 Mile Creek was documented by the end of the 1930s as Campbell County #1. So they were the first to start trying to document archaeology sites in different parts of Kentucky. Next slide. So one of the big important federal laws for us here was the Historic Sites Act of 1935. This was passed with the personal approval and interest of Franklin Roosevelt and his Interior Secretary Ickes. This site is the first law to declare preservation to be national policy, and that quote up in the upper right is a quote from the law. This authorized the Park Service to undertake a wide range of research and survey programs. It set up the Historic American Building Survey, or HABS, and the Historic American Engineering Record, or HARE. It also set up the National Landmark Program for private property, not having to be on federal property. And it promoted public and private partnerships to encourage widespread preservation offers throughout, in partnership with private landowners. Part of what came out of this in the Depression was the CCC and the WPA. And for our purposes, the WPA is the most important. Excuse me. This was archaeology on a grand scale. The WPA excavated 72 sites in Kentucky alone, not to mention everywhere else, with Boone County having the most. They excavated at 7 different sites in Boone County. Some of these had more than one feature on them. The Robbins Mound, which is pictured on the right. The top slide is the before picture, and the bottom slide is they are in progress of taking the mound down piece by piece. Robbins site actually had 2 mounds. So it was large scale, dozens and dozens of people digging at a time. They were focusing on features and burials. They were not sifting dirt or collecting small artifacts. Radiocarbon dating obviously wasn't known yet. Next slide. Doing on time. All right. One site that they excavated on Mudlick Creek included 2 village sites and a mound. They collected a lot of important data on habitation, ceremonial structures, and more. These are some pictures, WPA pictures of excavations at that site. Next slide. Starting in 1945, we start to see more large-scale archaeology on a federal scale with the interstate highway system in 1956. And also they began a lot of work on hydroelectric dams and water reservoirs, many high-profile projects. This was when first digs were undertaken at Jamestown. Another famous one was the Missouri River Survey up along the Missouri River. So there's some large-scale excavating going on to the right there. Next slide. So we start, I'm going to turn this over to Doug in a minute, but for a little bit, we'll have to hurry up here, Doug. So during this time frame, we start to get some new perspectives in archaeology. They're starting to realize the importance of research questions, looking for information rather than just fancy artifacts, that even a little tiny artifact can give you as much information as a whole pot. They begin to sift the soil and collect all the data for later study. And obviously radiocarbon dating is coming in here as well. Locally, the Rogers site in Boone County is a great example of this. L.S. Crawford dug there from the early 50s to the early 60s. In the early 1950s, they dug a mound and then a village site. They did not sift the soil, emphasis on keeping larger things, not nearly as many artifacts. By the early 60s, when they excavated at the second site, they laid out a grid, they sifted the soil, and they got radiocarbon dates. So that village site has a much larger quantity of artifacts, including flint flakes and more pottery. I actually ended up writing my master's thesis on this site because Ellis passed away before he could finish writing it up. And then I have just next slide, go to see Ellis Crawford here. Wait, one more. There we go. Ellis Crawford was a self-made scholar. As a museum director, 1950 to 1970, he put the museum on the map with professional archaeologists and paleontologists around the US. He did not have a college degree, but he was elected members of multiple national scientific organizations. These people visited him at the museum and his sites. He attended national conferences and gave papers, all the while encouraging young people to participate and volunteers as well. Brief mention of Howard McCord. He became the Virginia State Archaeologist. I had mentioned the Bent site over in Campbell County, and this was another Fort Ancient village, so post 1000 AD. He excavated it in the late 40s and early 50s and published a paper on it in 1953. And he donated all the artifacts to the Behringer-Crawford Museum. So that's another famous one. All right, Doug, you're up. Almost 10 after. All right.
So Jeannine brought us up through the 1950s, and she showed you quite a bit of change on how archaeology was conducted and who was doing it. By the 1960s and 1970s, there was a national interest in social issues and subjects. A number of laws were passed regarding historic preservation, archaeology, ecology, environmental preservation, and conservation. So part of this legislation at the late 1960s is the National Historic Preservation Act. This legislation set up the National Register of Historic Places. This also stated that federal agencies had to take into consideration the effect of their work on significant cultural resources, being buildings and archaeological sites. This really changed the nature of archaeology in the country. We started looking at archaeological sites as limited and non-renewable resources. Prior to this legislation, virtually all work was done through museums, universities, or in national parks, for example. A couple decades later, in the 1980s, 3/4 or more of archaeologists were working as contract archaeologists. This was to help developers and institutions comply with the new federal laws, and this is really carried on through today. And this is what we do: is we do the compliance work. And one of the main things that we look at, that we kind of test against in this legislation, is the National Register of Historic Places. When we find a site or when we document a site, we're looking, is this site eligible for the National Register of Historic Places? Next slide, please. So the National Register has 4 criteria that at least one has to be met by the site. The 4 main criteria: A is be associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history, or criterion B, is the site associated with the lives or persons significant in our past. And in some cases, this might be a president. This might be just a big figure from a town that started somebody that chartered a town. Revolutionary War veterans, little things like that. Somebody generally with titles. Criterion C is, does it embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, a period, or a method of construction, or represent the work of a master, or possess high artistic values? The common thread with A, B, and C is a lot of this is really geared towards structures and buildings and not so much archaeological sites. So later on, it was in the early 80s, criterion D was added. And this is pretty much the catch-all for archaeological sites. Does the site yield or be likely to yield information important in prehistory or history. That right there is generally what we're looking for. However, we do document historic structures and buildings. And if you look on the right side of the screen, there's a picture of the McGlasson log house that was up in Ellesmere. This structure actually met criterion A, B, and C. And that was a pretty neat project to work on. The house was relocated, and but we documented with tons of photos, scaled drawings, and a report that I believe is on file there at the Erlanger Historical Society
And the Kenton County Library.
and Kenton County Library.
Yep.
And then below that is a map of that is the Gaines Tavern down in Walton, right where 16 runs into 25. And that is, it shows a remote sensing area and areas that we excavated. And this one, I believe, met criterion D.
And it met all four because of the building.
Got all four of them because of the building there. So these are the main criteria. That this is how we look at the information that we have, and that the National Historic Preservation Act also set up government agencies to take responsibility on their projects or whatever they have a hand in. And then it also allowed for the states to start their own historic preservation offices called SHPOs. Ours is the Kentucky Heritage Council and Office of State Archaeology. Ohio is the Historic Preservation Office, or the Ohio History Connection. It's all kind of wrapped into that. Next slide, please. So that legislation was a real big change for archaeology, and from that came cultural resources management. And that's what we do, because we just don't deal with prehistoric sites or historic sites, but we do buildings. We do the excavation, surveying. And one of the big changes is, prior to cultural resources management really as a career, archaeologists would hear about sites, maybe word of mouth or through a museum, and they would go excavate that site for a long time, several years, decade, and maybe not publish a whole lot. But now most of the archaeology done isn't even done in an academia setting. It's done in the private sector. That's the cultural resources management, where we are now doing surveys prior to development. So the National Historic Preservation Act puts the weight on the shoulders of whoever's developing the land or applying for a permit, any kind of federal permit to develop. They're the ones that are responsible for having all these studies done. Some of the triggers that we have to deal with, the compliance work, is if there's any federal money, federal land, or federal permit that you might need for an undertaking, then it's a federal undertaking. In that case, our report gets reviewed by a federal agency. It also gets reviewed by a state agency. And so that is probably 95% of the work these days. And I believe at this point in time, I saw some numbers, they were a little dated, I think from 2020 or 2022. There was about 10 to 12,000 archaeologists in the private sector in the United States. And out of all the archaeologists in the United States right now, there's, I think, 2% are academia. So it's a very, very small number, but we do believe that we're doing very important work. And we're glad to see some of this legislation still surviving. And it's actually been altered again in 1990 when NAGPRA was introduced, and that's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And this finally brought Native tribes and Native peoples to the table when consulting, and it has grown from there to where they're being consulted before projects are being conducted. And this is, believe it or not, it's a very new concept, and it's involving people, involving communities, bringing them to the table, making sure the public is aware of things going on, and getting getting input from the tribes who know their traditions, who know their beliefs, who know their culture better. And what that's doing for us is really adding to our knowledge of their sites. And we're able to incorporate that stuff into our reports, our information, and then hopefully making it public for everybody to see. Next slide, please.
All right. My turn. I think in the interest of time, I think we're going to put the public archaeology off until 2 weeks from now. So we're going to come back to the public archaeology. So Mary Jane, let's go to the next one. Okay. So we really need to talk a little bit about ethics and responsibility in archaeology, because to distinguish between, for example, collectors who go out and dig and sell artifacts versus archaeologists. And this is my favorite quote from Howard Carter, actually, who discovered the King Tut's tomb. I'll try to read this. It chokes me up every time, but we'll see here. So he says, "The things an archaeologist finds are not his own property, to treat as he pleases or neglect as he chooses. They are a direct legacy from the past to the present age. If by carelessness, slackness, or ignorance, he lessens the sum of knowledge that might have been obtained from them, he knows himself to be guilty of an archaeological crime of the first magnitude. Destruction of evidence is so painfully easy, and I can't do it, and so hopelessly irreparable." So the basis of everything that is encapsulated in that kind of becomes a code of ethics that reflects those sentiments. And to be a professional archaeologist in the United States, at least, you have to agree to these. And there's many, many more. I've distilled this down to a few very important concepts. Archaeological sites, as Doug has talked about, are non-renewable resources. We destroy as we excavate. And that's why we have learned over the decades, right? We went from, those big, large scale and into sifting and collecting, because it's gone. So we have to collect as much evidence as we can and document it: photographs, notes, drawings, and now many more technological advances. We pledge that we won't misrepresent our findings or our qualifications. We won't profit by selling artifacts. We dig responsibly, and we share our results. So there's many, many more. It's like a whole page. If you want to join a professional organization or to be certified by the Register of Professional Archaeologists, or the RPA, and Doug and I both have RPA after our names, you have to agree to this code of ethics. And it helps keep us in line and keep us on our toes. So let's go to the last slide. So we're going to call this the end for now. I saw one question I do need to answer, but we'll see what the questions are, but I think, and how much time we have left, but I think that we'll save most of them so we can give a little better answer instead of just off the top of our head in 2 weeks. So we want you all to come back. On September 9th, we're going to do a brief overview of archaeology methods. We'll go back and pick up the local public archaeology, which also has a long history. And most importantly, we'll have an extended question and answer session. So I have an email down there at the bottom if you want to email questions to, besides what's in the chat. If you think of something later on, you can email it to that. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Or you can try to stump us, come back and ask a question in 2 weeks. What kind of questions do you have? And then we'll try to answer those. And then I guess we could do the trivia question answer. I've got it down there in the bottom. Do we have a winner?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, Jeannine and Doug, for such an excellent presentation. I hope I did all right with changing the slides.
Oh, yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Heather, do you want to go ahead and repeat that trivia question, and then we'll announce our winner?
Yeah, so the trivia question was which local county had the most WPA sponsored archaeological digs in the region from the late 1930s to the 1940s? That answer was Boone County, and we had a winner right away, which was Patty. I hope I'm saying this right, Chalfont. So congratulations, Patty.
Way to go.
Congratulations, that's awesome. I saw one question I need to answer right away, and then Heather, we can see what some of the other ones are if we got time. Somebody asked, where was the McGlasson log house moved to? I don't know, is the quickest, honest answer. I know who moved it, and I know generally where, but it was moved by a neighbor to private property in another county. So it was, every log was tagged and it was dismantled log by log. And then it was transported off the site to private property. So it has been salvaged. And as Doug mentioned, the Kenton County, well, Erlanger-Ellesmere Historical Society has data, and they also have a piece of one of the logs. And Kenton County Historical Society has all of the documentation, the paperwork, the drawings, the large format photograph negatives, everything is in Covington. So we were able to keep all that local instead of having to send it elsewhere to be curated. Okay, any
I
other
think
quick?
we have a little bit of time where we could answer some of the questions. I see.
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
chat.
Yeah,
Heather,
let's do
you want to
that.
go through some of those?
Yeah, so the first question we had was why are these sites not protected? Referencing the gravel pits.
Okay, I'll take that one real quick. There's a long answer and a short answer. So the shorter answer is it's on private property. It was on private property. Ohio and Kentucky have no state laws that protect archaeological sites on private property. There's even fewer in Ohio. In Kentucky, well, in Ohio and Kentucky, if the site is on public land, like say even city-owned or county-owned or state-owned, then there are protections. And if there are human burials, those are protected. But there are no other laws that protect. So you can do anything you want. You can bulldoze it. Even if you own a house on the National Register, you can bulldoze it if it's on private property. Indiana does have some state law. It's been watered down, but they do have a little bit more protection at the state level. So that's the quick answer.
And we did just have one other question. Do we want to do it now or save it for next week?
What is it? We'll see.
I say go for it.
Okay, can you shed some light on how to tell which artifacts are artifacts or bones are real versus which are replicas?
That was a good question from Jason, because he said as a kid, he visited museums in places like Big Bone, and he wondered what artifacts or bones were real and what were replicas.
If it looks too good to be true, it's probably a replica. That's a short answer.
And they're doing some really amazing stuff with 3D printing, but it's super advantageous too, because they can make exact replicas of, maybe a one of a kind thing and send it across the world without worrying about it breaking. So, but the 3D printing nowadays is pretty amazing.
But you do have to be careful if you say you're, at some yard sale or flea market or, whatever artifact collector thing or something, and somebody's got beautiful projectile points for sale, take another look, because a lot of them are modern. People are making replicas to sell. So you have to be very careful. But some of it's experience, some of it's like actual, testing of things to see what it looks like. Maybe on the inside. All right, so people email questions if we don't have any more big ones in here, but think about questions. We certainly got plenty to talk about in 2 weeks, but we're hoping to get some good questions. that we can give some more in-depth answers to.
And what's that email again? And we want to make sure we get that in the chat.
K&V CRM, so KANDVCRM @gmail.com. KANDVCRM @gmail.com.
Everybody get thinking about all those questions you have and have them ready for next week. Well, thank you again so much, Jeannine and Doug, for joining us. And thank you so much for joining us again for our next presentation. Jeannine, you always do such a great job on our presentation.
We will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Definitely. Now, we do have some promotions that we want to let everybody know about the museum going on right now. Our year-long celebration is continuing because this is our 75th anniversary. So it's 75 years of art, culture, and community. So each floor of the museum has been transformed. We invite everyone to come visit and rediscover the museum. And lions and tigers and tots. Oh my. Preschool explorers are invited to Behringer-Crawford Museum on Thursday, September 4th at 11 a.m. for Chippy's Sensational Kids Club Wildlife Safari, a morning filled with animal-themed fun. This program is for tots ages 3 to 5 and their caregivers. Register now by calling the museum at 859-491-4003. Pre-registration is required at least 5 days in advance, so make sure you get your reservation in. The bidding has begun. Silent art is now on display at the museum and is available to bid on through September 6th at 9:30 p.m. Please bid now and bid often. There's a wide variety of pieces. We have jewelry, paintings, some of what's shown here on your screen, all done by local artists for a good cause. So please go to bcmuseum.org/freshart for more information and to get bidding. Speaking of September 6th, that is a very big day at the museum because that is our 33rd annual Fresh Art Live auction and party. Tickets are still available for purchase at $60 for a donation. We're very excited about this year's event. We will have our live auction by auctioneer David Wallace, with food by Billy Maccabee at the Roost, music by Chris Cosentino from the Turkeys. So it's going to be a great, fun party. So get your ticket now by visiting our website at bcmuseum.org or call the museum again at the number on your screen. There are still tickets available for purchase for our 75th anniversary wine raffle. For just $5, you get a chance at winning this wine-filled basket, pictured here with over $250 worth of contents. Purchase your tickets at the museum front desk, and the winner will be drawn on September 6th at the Fresh Art event. And let's see. Well, I guess I don't have my next. We also have a flyaway raffle for 2 Frontier airline flight vouchers. So this year we have added actually a CVG terminal garage 1-week parking voucher. The whole package is valued at $750. So please get those tickets. You can find out more information on our website at bcmuseum.org/freshart. And we'll be back, as Jeannine has told you, on September 9th, again with Jeannine and Doug, with our archaeology Q&A. But as always, if you have an idea for a future presentation, please email me, Mary Jane, at communications@bcmuseum.org. And that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you to all of our sponsors and supporters. Make sure to check us out on our YouTube and like and subscribe. And that's all we have time for tonight. So everyone take care and good night.